I speak as a 70-year-old American who has lived every year of my life with the United States at war. I regard the United States as the most lawless and dangerous country in the world by far. And I want to explain that in the context of our discussion. First, we have the biggest war machine by far. It's about $1.5 trillion a year, all in. The Pentagon is $1 trillion. Add in the CIA and the other intelligence agencies. Add in many other departments, Homeland Security, the veterans who are all maimed because of endless wars, and you get to about 1.5 trillion. It swamps all the rest of the world. The United States is the only country that has ever used atomic weapons, and when they were used under completely false pretenses. They were not to speed the end of the war because Japan was begging to surrender, but Truman wanted to show Stalin a thing or two. And so not just one, but two atomic bombs were used. And the United States never expressed a moment of regret, because this is how an imperial power of the strength of the United States acts. The United States has walked out of crucial nuclear arms agreements that were built to stabilize the world. In 2002, the United States walked out of the anti-ballistic missile treaty unilaterally. This is the most important reason for the Ukraine war. People should understand, not in terms of international law, in terms of facts, because this was the great destabilizer of Central and Eastern Europe. This was the great real crime against Russia, because Russia said, what are you doing putting in Aegis missile systems in Poland, in Romania? What are you doing threatening to put in such systems in Ukraine? This is what this discussion has been about, and I've been part of it for 25 years. I've watched this close up. The United States walked out of the Intermediate Nuclear Force Agreement in 2019, and that's why we have the Oreshnik launched yesterday, 2 days ago, by Russia, because that is an intermediate nuclear, ballistic missile that would have been prohibited under the INF. But when the U.S. walked out of the INF, Russia accelerated. Now we have a 10 Mach intermediate range missile that targets every city of Europe. This is the United States damage. So when we think about war, this is not the same thing as violence or conflict. You can have lots of conflict without war. The United States is a very violent society. It used to lynch African Americans with impunity. That was mobs. That was not war. War is a state action. War is action by states. And this is very important. What von Clausewitz said in 1832 is really the key to understanding what is happening. War is the continuation of politics with other means. It is a state action. One should look at states. And when it comes to our world today, you have to look at the great powers to understand these wars. Even the war of Israel and Palestine right now, this is a U.S. war and a proxy war between the U.S. and Iran, every bit as much as it's a war of Israel and Palestine. And so this needs to be understood. What is the source of these wars? Why is the U.S. in Ukraine essentially fighting a war with the Ukrainians dying? This is what needs to be really understood. Now, there's another point that is very important, and I'm sorry to say it because I don't have time to elaborate on it. Yes, there's a lot of misinformation and false information and disinformation on social media. But where is the main disinformation coming from? By far from the Pentagon and from the CIA, from organized information outlets. I have spent my entire life with this, and you cannot believe how much misinformation we get every single day. Because I have advised more than 100 governments around the world, I have seen things with my own eyes. I've seen US CIA coups with my own eyes. I've seen what happened in Ukraine in 2014 with my own eyes, not with someone else's eyes. And I have seen the lies that are told by the United States government about this. But this is not to be, this is not a surprise. Governments lie, but superpowers make super lies. And if you're running the largest war machine in the world, you are going to lie all the time. Every action by the United States, bombing Serbia for 78 straight days in 1999, was built on a tissue of lies. Every day of it. And everything afterwards was a tissue of lies. The entire Iraq war was not because they thought there were weapons of mass destruction. Weapons of mass destruction was the outcome of a focus group inside the Pentagon. How are we going to sell this war to the American people? Abe Shulsky headed the department in the Pentagon to figure out how to sell the war in the fall of 2002. The coup that brought down Yanukovych was not a popular demonstration. It was a CIA operation. I happened to be there soon afterwards. I was taken on a tour of the Maidan. I was shown, we paid $50,000 for that one. We paid $25,000 for that one. I'm talking about an American explaining this to me. We paid $15,000 for that one. These are setups. These are setup operations. Of course, people love America. Oh, it's a great country. Mr. Sachs, how can you talk like this? Because we're on the brink of nuclear war is why I talk like this. Because I know how my country acts. It's not my country. It's a lawless government. Who made the decision 2 days ago that ATACMS can shoot deep inside Russia? Another brilliant move. We don't even know if the President of the United States is compos mentis right now. We have a deep state that takes these decisions, not a word of explanation to the American people. It's all lies. And I've seen it all through my life because I've been advisors to prime ministers and to presidents and to central bank governors and to some of the wonderful people on this panel. And I've seen a lot. So my point is, international law is our best hope, by far. The UN is our best hope. It's a baby in the history of humanity. It's about 100 years old that we've been trying this effort, starting with the League of Nations, which was actually a club of empires, so it wasn't even at the status of the UN. So this is a wonderful, enterprise, but we can't take as given the understandings that we say we have, that it's straightforward, Russia was the aggressor. No, it's not so simple. The United States overthrew the Ukrainian government for a reason, by the way. For a reason, a very clear reason. Zbig Brzezinski spelled it out absolutely explicitly, vividly, word by word in 1997. It was to surround Russia in the Black Sea with NATO. And since Yanukovych didn't want it, he had to be toppled. Sorry, this is how it is. And I'm sorry, but this is how it is. And this is explained to me on the Maidan. So if you if you were at the Maidan that day, you would have seen the role that the United States played. So we need to understand why we have these wars. These wars are a continuation of politics. You want to end the war on international law? Then understand what is really going on. The war in Palestine is about the lack of Israel's compliance with international law, period. Starting with Resolution 242 onward, period. And the International Court of Justice in July ruled clearly that Israel has 1 year to return to the 4th of June, 1967 borders. That is international law, if you want it, ladies and gentlemen. And there are about 30 UN Security Council resolutions and General Assembly resolutions that all say this. It's clear we want international law. 2 states living side by side in peace on the borders of 4th of June, 1967. Period. That one's done. What about Ukraine? Easy. It's your question, Mr. President. Mr. Prime Minister. President, sorry. Excuse me. Sorry. President Tadic, I apologize. Why did the United States have to put NATO right up against Russia's border? Zbig Brzezinski explained it in 1997, the idea of this, in the Grand Chessboard, and in an article called A Strategy for Eurasia in the Council on Foreign Relations. Clinton had already decided this in 1994, by the way. And the idea was great power politics. We can break up Russia the same way we broke up the Soviet Union. It's easy. This has been the CIA's dream since 1947. It was the OSS dream in 1945 onward. So they thought, and Brzezinski spells it out completely. He says in 1997, if we move NATO, what's Russia going to do? It has no alternative but to submit. He writes that exactly in the Grand Chessboard. And there's a whole chapter explaining Russia will never side with China. Russia will never side with Iran. Everything wrong, of course, as is typical of these strategists. Everything wrong, but it's spelled out. So this was the idea, and it was blocked. It was blocked because it was unwise, it was reckless, it was dangerous, it was provocative. Mrs. Merkel, Chancellor Merkel didn't want it. The European leaders knew this was absolutely reckless when they still had a mouth that they spoke honestly. Now they don't speak honestly. But when they did, they told the United States, don't do this. This will bring us to war. And then the United States could not take no for an answer, so they toppled Yanukovych. This is straightforward. That's illegal to topple a government. That's international law. That's when the war started. The war started on February 22nd, 2014. Not on February 24th, 2022, as we say. It started exactly 8 years before that with the illegal overthrow of a government. It's interesting, ladies and gentlemen, if you want documentation about real U.S. foreign policy, read the book Covert Regime Change by John Mearsheimer's student, Lindsay O'Rourke, published in 2017. She documents 64 covert regime change operations between 1947 and 1989, including one in Greece, of course, a very notorious one that affected Prime Minister Papanero's father. This was a U.S. CIA operation. They're all over the world. They continue until this day because it's complete impunity. So if we want international law, I'm all for it completely. But please don't believe the simple narratives, because there's a lot of money that the U.S. pours into these narratives, and they're phony narratives. The real narrative is it's the biggest war machine in the world. It's got one overarching idea, which is hegemony. It's a delusion. It's going to get us all killed until that war machine is stopped. The best way to stop it is through international law and through understanding the truth. Thank you.
Yes, one comment and one question. The comment is relating to what you've said about identity and about the U.S. and keeping different identities of its citizens and globalization and nation states and so on. And yes, I do believe that almost everything is about identity. I mean, if we take Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I think that belonging is the second one. Belonging being part of a family, part of a group, part of a nation. And it looks like, at first, the entire world was embracing globalization. The idea was, that it would open the road for more information, more knowledge, more tools and bridging also gaps in terms of societies. But what happened is that it threatened others. You were speaking about fear and hope. It exists, but not in the same groups. There are groups that fear is more influential in their state of mind, and there are groups that hope is more influential on their way of thinking. So my suggestion, and I completely agree that there's a huge difference between being patriotic, supporting your country, and between nationalistic thinking that this country is above others. And the solution is what I call globalization. Globalization. I mean, yes, and the United States is not a nation state. Therefore, for them, it's quite difficult to understand why it is all about identity in other nation states. It's different, but yet when you come immigrant to the United States, you need to accept or to absorb or to learn what does it mean to be part of this American dream by keeping your identity. But speaking about nation states, there shouldn't be a clash. It's becoming a clash when the feeling is that globalization threatens the existence of my nation state. But if we all agree that my state, according to its own values, it's part, and I'm proud of being a citizen, it's part of my identity, believing it is, values is part of who I am and what my country is, and therefore being part of the free world and supporting globalization as a means also to help others to spread know-how and so on, it's not a clash between two different things, but it's part of being something together. And my question is, especially to you, Jeffrey, I mean, we cannot turn a blind eye, or we are speaking, or even not only to you, speaking about international law. Yes, we are speaking, so we are speaking about countries, we are speaking about countries that are part of the members of the United Nations, believing or signing all these conventions of international law and so on. What about what we call actors that are non-state or these terrorist organizations? They don't give, excuse me, a shit about international law. So while we are talking about this stuff, they are doing whatever they want. So the ICC can make a decision on a leader of a democracy, but when I'm not entering into examples, but what does it mean to these terrorists that no matter what, he is fighting against these values? And therefore, just to turn a blind eye or to ignore this existence, so wars are not only between or provoked by countries and leaders for political reasons. And I think that ignoring some of the reasons for these groups to act is wrong. Well, I said that it's going to be a question.
Let me start in the following way on responding to that, and then I want to say a couple of words about both the EU and China. I first went to Israel 53 years ago, and the first thing that I heard when I arrived in Israel in 1971 was that we are making facts on the ground. It was called the Alone Plan, it was explained to me, and we're going to make settlements in the occupied territories. Wait a minute, I'm just explaining a background.
I mean, there are
wait a minute, let me explain the background as I see it.
Yeah.
From 1971, from 1967, there was a group in Israel that has now become dominant, which is we will never get back because it's a threat or because God gave us this, because Book of Joshua, whatever your theory is, and everyone's got their theories in Israel. But there's going to be no Palestinian state. You have a prime minister that has based his whole career on the denial of the political rights of the Palestinian people. Just like Israel could not fight one day without the United States, and that's literally true, I'm sorry to say. Hezbollah and Hamas could not fight a day without Iran and other support. This costs money. This is big weapons. This is a political issue. This is not a terrorist issue. Netanyahu's absolute devastating mistake, which he writes about in 1996 in his book, Fighting Terrorism, it's the whole explanation of why he's so messed up in his head. He says, because we have Hamas and Hezbollah, and they are supported by Syria, by Iraq, by Iran, by Sudan, by Libya, we have to overthrow all the governments that support these. I'm not making this up. This is in print. Then he explains it to the U.S. Congress in 2000. He explains this. I know this because I study this for a living. He explains this to the American Congress. You overthrow Saddam, it'll be beautiful. Look what'll happen in Iran next door. The plan was 7 wars in 5 years. This is all well documented. The problem is not Hamas and Hezbollah. Why? Because if you make an agreement with Iran, if you make an agreement with the Arab countries, they will be disarmed and dismembered as part of the agreement. This is so obvious. This is an excuse. This is not a reality. This is an excuse of Netanyahu, who has been the biggest disaster in Israel's history by far.
Trust me, I'm Netanyahu's opponent, and my question was really not just about Israel, Hamas, Hezbollah. Let's speak about Daesh. Let's speak about the Taliban. Let's speak about all these groups, how to fight.
Let's think about
Israel. This was really was not my intention.
Tippy, let's think about Al Qaeda. Who made it? The CIA. Excuse me. Everybody knows this. This is not a secret. This was part of the plan of Zbig Brzezinski, who I knew personally very well, by the way, in 1979 to trigger the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. He recruited them. He paid for them. Carter gave the CIA order for them. Not well explained in the New York Times, I admit, but basic facts of American history. Now, let me say with respect to the European Union, I could not agree more. It is the most glorious creation. Its biggest mistake is that it put NATO headquarters and EU headquarters in the same city. This is the complete confusion of the EU. The EU is a wondrous idea. NATO is an absolute anachronism. And in 1990, to end World War II, literally to end World War II with German reunification, the agreement was made that NATO will not move 1 inch eastward. This was said on February 9th, 1990, by Hans-Dietrich Genscher and James Baker III to Mikhail Gorbachev. I happen to be Mikhail Gorbachev, President Gorbachev's advisor in economics. So this was a commitment that was made. He disbanded the Warsaw Pact. NATO should have been disbanded that day. It wasn't. In 1994, Clinton signed, because of the deep state idea of Wolfowitz and Cheney and all these neocons, that NATO would expand all the way to Ukraine and to Georgia, exactly the opposite of what was needed. This is Europe's main problem. The United States can't leave Europe to its peace and its prosperity. And also, the United States hates Russia-German economic interactions. That's why it blew up the pipeline. This also is not exactly a surprise. So this is this point. On China, China is no threat in any single way to the United States of America. We have a big thing in between called the Pacific Ocean. There is no way that China is a threat to the U.S. except a nuclear war. There is no way that the United States can defeat China except a nuclear war. If we avoid a nuclear war, neither side threatens each other. So what does the United States do? It violates 45 years of treaty obligations with China by arming and increasing the armaments to Taiwan. Are you kidding? Are you kidding? Nancy Pelosi has to fly to Taiwan. Taiwan is part of China, ladies and gentlemen. That's agreed both by the People's Republic of China and the Republic of China. Both sides agree, one China. It's part of U.S. foreign policy since 1979. And yet we provoke, and I'm telling you why we provoke, because the United States does not want a peer competitor. But China's no threat
At all. It's not a threat at all. And even the arming of the atolls in the South China Sea is not because China's aiming to take over territory. It's because the United States, in a publication you can read every year, talks about the choke points that the United States has from the Sea of Malacca to the South China Sea to the first island chain to be choke points on China's sea lanes for food and energy. So the United States is a threat to China. China's trying to counter the threat by a naval buildup. This is basic stuff. Stay away from each other, for God's sake, and then there's no world war. This is very basic.